Supreme Court student loan hearings. Now, this is a big one. I talked to Kim Iverson about this yesterday, and there was a lot to say there. I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive tonight because I do want to remind people, first and foremost, why we're in this situation right now with the Supreme Court to begin with. It goes back to 2021 with Elizabeth Warren, Ayanna Pressley, and Chuck Schumer. Now, I want to remind everybody what happened here, because February 2021, those three, they came up with an initiative to cancel student loan debt. Now, they were asking to cancel up to $50,000. I told you guys, I think it should have been all of it. But in this ask, they specifically told Joe Biden exactly how to do it. Joe Biden chose not to go that route. And he chose to use the HEROES Act instead of the Higher Education Act of 1965, which meant that a federal judge would be able to strike it down. And that is why we have this issue with the Supreme Court right now. Let's go into it. Warren, Schumer, Pressley, colleagues, President Biden can and should use executive action to cancel up to $50,000 in federal student loan debt immediately. This goes back to February 2021. Now, I'm just going to show you what the instructions were. This is not that difficult. Not that difficult at all. 11 a.m. today, Senator Warren, Leader Schumer, and Representative Pressley, also Alma Adams, Ilhan Omar, and Maud Dare Jones, held that press conference, reintroducing their resolution. There was a live stream for this. So this was live. Like, you could have watched this virtually. Now, here were these instructions, because this is the part that I think some people have not seen. The resolution recognizes the Secretary of Education's broad administrative authority to cancel up to $50,000 in federal student debt using the modification and compromise authority Congress has already granted the Secretary in law. Here's the big one. And this is the piece that Biden messed up. Calls on President Biden to take executive action to administratively cancel up to $50,000 in federal student loan debt for federal student loan borrowers using existing legal authorities under Section 432A of the Higher Education Act of 1965. He decided to do this through the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act was attached to the pandemic. Once it was declared that we were no longer under a state of emergency, the HEROES Act no longer applies. Now, this was something that happened right before the midterms. We all knew what this was really about. Gen Z voters showed up in record numbers to vote for Democrats in the midterms. They actually were the ones that turned the vote out. They came out for two reasons. They came out for canceling student loan debt, and they came out to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Neither one of those things have happened. And after the midterms, even Joe Biden said, we're not going to be able to codify Roe. The week of the midterm results, the federal judge struck this down. So there went the cancellation of up to $10,000 or $10,000 and $20,000 for those who have Pell Grants. But just like that, it was gone. And it has been redirected to the Supreme Court. And this is why we are where we are today. Now, some people warned that this was going to happen. Brianna Joy Gray had an expert come on and predicted that, yeah, this is going to get pulled back. But for some reason, when it happened, people were surprised. People were like, oh my God, I can't believe this. What do we do now? And it's like, mainstream media didn't cover that. Mainstream media didn't tell you what was probably going to happen because it wasn't done the correct way. Independent media did. And so now everyone's talking about it because this is the talk of the week. And we're going to show a couple of clips here. So I'm going to go ahead and give my overall shout out to Case Study QB because he has a couple of clips here we're going to go over. And then I'm going to explain to you what is going to happen if some form of student loan debt is not canceled in this country. And it's not going to be good for any of us, whether you have student loan debt or not. We're going to get into the specifics about how it is going to affect the economy. Let's get started with this clip here from Morning Joe. Man, they're a doozy. Let's jump in.
The Biden administration's plan to wipe away nearly $500 billion in student loan debt, facing a skeptical conservative majority on the Supreme Court.
And along comes the government and tells that person, you don't have to pay your loan.
The financial futures of more than 40 million now in limbo. People like Maggie Bell, the first in her family to graduate from college, carrying $30,000 in federal loans.
Debt is difficult. It's depressing. It's stressful.
She wants the justices to uphold President Biden's plan to erase $10,000 in federal student loan debt for anyone who makes less than $125,000 and $20,000 for lower income borrowers.
First of all, it should have never been means tested. And I was pretty livid about this when it was announced. When you mean test it, it delays the process. You have to fill out more paperwork. It makes it freaking confusing. People's information is all messed up. It would have been so much easier if it wasn't means tested. And second of all, he should have just canceled all of it. What is this? Who came up with these amounts? Who was the one that sat back and said 125,000? Where did that number come from? Who chose that number? Because you can make $125,000, but if you're making that and you live in San Francisco, that's not really much. If you're making $125,000 and you live in New York City, that's not really much. So I don't know.
Groceries are high, gas is high. Seeing a vacation this year is very difficult for me, right? And I'm not the only person in this boat.
Liberal justices saying the proposal will help millions left struggling after the pandemic.
They don't have friends or families or others who can help them make these payments. The evidence is clear that many of them will have to default.
But the White House plan is now on pause after 6 Republican-led states and borrowers sued. Several conservative justices questioning whether the administration overstepped its authority by going around Congress.
Most casual observers would say if you're going to give up that much amount of money, they would think that's something for Congress to act on.
Tasfika Robb is a college sophomore and son of a taxi driver. He didn't take out federal loans and says it's unfair to force him to pay off others' debts.
I chose not to take this loan, even though I could definitely benefit from it. And I needed that money, but I chose not to. So how is it?
How are you paying off someone else? How are you paying it off, though? I don't like this talking point. I don't like it where people are like, I'm paying off your loans. How are you paying it off? Because I didn't see that I didn't see that anywhere in the agreement. That the government would be taking money from you to pay off someone else's debt. That's a poor talking point.
To people like myself, I'm not able to get a single penny out of this program.
NBC's Laura Jarrett reporting.
And you pay taxes, don't you? Don't you pay taxes? Do you get every service that you use for paying taxes with? Does it apply to you every time? No, it doesn't. Let's go on.
So, John, we heard a couple of arguments against this. The fairness argument, which is the people who didn't take out loans, people who did pay off their loans, where's their help? And then we heard from Chief Justice Roberts some of the legality of it, which is to say, if you want to give away $500 billion of taxpayer money, that's not something for the president to do. That's something for the Congress to do.
Right. Congress has the power of the purse, of course. And this isn't much of a surprise considering the conservative lean of this Supreme Court. best argument the Biden administration believes is the idea that these plaintiffs didn't have standing to begin with. And Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Barrett, did explore that possibility yesterday. So we shouldn't guarantee what happens here, but certainly it seems like the conservative majority leaning against letting this program stand. Chief Justice Roberts, often the swing vote in the situations, also appeared deeply skeptical. And this does seem to be breaking down on, not entirely, but largely partisan lines here. And I do think it sets up a dynamic where you've had executive power rolled back a number of times by this court on issues last year on climate change as just one example. And then, of course, combine that with the court's decision on Roe v. Wade to overturn that last year. And you have a Biden White House that, as it looks towards a likely re-election bid, part of its argument, running against that Supreme Court that it believes is out of step with with the majority of Americans.
Eddie.
Okay, let's talk about something here in reference to the power of the Supreme Court, because it was very clear to me about a week or two ago. You guys explained to me that a number of you did not take civics in school, and I was required to take civics. It is really important that you understand how the branches of government work. At the end of the day, the Supreme Court can have the final say so. And why am I bringing this up? It's not just because of canceling student loan debt. It's also because of some of these other policies that many of us champion for. And we were not really told the full scope of how these policies would be passed. And I'm going to use a big popular one like Medicare for All. Even if someone like Bernie Sanders would have won, and Bernie Sanders decided to pass Medicare for All by executive order, guess what? The Supreme Court can come in and strike it down. That's something that Bernie Sanders didn't tell us when he was running for president. This is why, like, the people who were running against him kept saying things like, you don't have the votes. Because the reality is he didn't. In the House, he doesn't have them. And he don't have them in the Senate either. But what does this show us, people? This shows us that at the end of the day, the Supreme Court can come in and strike it down. So how do you get around it? How do you get around it? By the way, this is probably never going to be tried again because of all of the legal paperwork going into this, all the hours going into this, because of the way that it was done. So that's why I said, even back then, if you're going to do it, go ahead and cancel all of it. Now, the Supreme Court, have some of them had student loans? Yes. In fact, Clarence Thomas had student loans. He even talked about the crushing weight of student loans. But does that mean that he's for canceling student loan debt? No, he's not. Let's go on. Now, this was from the AP News. Justice Thomas wrote about, what is this? Hold on, guys. I don't know why the window accept all cookies. Justice Thomas wrote of crushing weight of student loans. Now, this is his own personal experience. So listen to this. The Supreme Court won't have far to look if it wants a personal take on the crushing weight of student debt that underlies the Biden administration college loan forgiveness plan. Justice Clarence Thomas was in his mid-40s and his third year on the nation's highest court when he paid off the last of his debt from his time at Yale Law School. Thomas, the court's longest-serving justice and staunchest conservative, has been skeptical of the Biden administration initiatives. And when the Supreme Court hears arguments Tuesday involving President Joe Biden's debt relief plan that would wipe away up to $20,000 in outstanding student loans, Thomas is not likely to be a vote in the administration's favor. But the justices' own experiences can be relevant in how they approach a case. And alone among them, Thomas has written about the role student loans played in his financial struggles. So even though he has struggled financially because of student loan debt, he still doesn't want to agree to cancel student loan debt. Not even the $10,000 or the $20,000 for those who had the Pell Grants. So here's someone who was actually directly affected by student loan debt, and they still don't want to cancel it. You know why? Because of the political parties. Because he's a Republican, and that's not what his party wants. And this is the problem with political parties. If all of these justices in the Supreme Court were just independent and did not belong to a party, I think you may see them vote differently. Because they'd have no team to explain their actions to. They would be acting alone. So it goes on to say, I guess the font's just really small on this one. It goes on to talk about the other justices' experiences in reference to their students, their children. Listen to this. Of the 7 justices on the court who are parents, 4 have signaled through their investments that they don't want their own children to be saddled with onerous college debt and have piled money into tax-free college savings accounts that might limit any need for loans. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Neil Gorsuch have the most on hand, at least $600,000 and at least $300,000 respectively, according to annual disclosure reports the justices filed in 2022. Each of them have 2 kids, so their kids' college is pretty much set. Could you imagine having $300,000 in your savings account? Some people will never make that. Just imagine. So again, they don't have to approve of it because their kids are not going to be affected. Their kids don't have to take out student loans. Even more, Justices Amy Coney Barrett, who has 7 children, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, who has 2, also have invested money in college savings accounts in which any earnings or growth is tax-free if spent on education. None of the justices would comment on this story. And this is not to shame people for being able to save money and put money away for a rainy day. I'm not trying to shame you for that. But what I am saying is, it could affect how they feel about this situation because their kids are not going to have to deal with it. And it speaks to a larger issue that we have in this country, which is this. It seems like a lot of the people who are making all the decisions are usually not directly affected. The politicians making decisions about healthcare have good healthcare. The politicians that voted against the railroad workers having 7 days sick leave, they have unlimited sick leave. The justices who struck down Roe v. Wade, they weren't affected. This is the problem. This is the problem. Now, we thought the answer to that problem was electing people that are working class. And you come to find out those people weren't actually working class. Remember that whole experiment, Justice Democrats? We thought that was the answer to the question, to bring those people in so that they'll fight for the working class people. But then what we found is like once they got there, they just got swallowed up by the system. They became a part of the same system that they were supposed to fight against. So that's a big part of the problem. Now I have a clip I want to show you really quickly, also from Case Study QB. And I want you to hear from a teacher discussing her experience with student loan debt. As you know, teachers in a lot of states in this country, they don't make much money. I know teachers making $40,000 a year and they've been teaching for years. Massachusetts typically pays teachers pretty well, but most states don't, based on what I've seen. Listen to what the teachers have to say.
Really pisses me off. During the pandemic, We understand that small businesses were hurting, and we helped them, and it didn't go to the Supreme Court to challenge it. Big businesses were hurting, and we helped them, and it didn't go to the Supreme Court to challenge it. All of a sudden, when it's about our students, they challenge it. The corporations challenge it. The student loan lenders challenge it. That is not right. That is not fair. And that is what we are fighting as well when we say cancel student debt.
I'm so sorry, Brian. I've never met someone more loud and wrong. I mean, to allow our kids, the teachers got bailed out too. They asked it, so they wanted to get the shot first. They wanted new ventilation systems in the school. We gave them all of that, and they still didn't want to go back to the school. Then on top of that, when you talk about our kids, are our kids smarter after the pandemic?
Well, you're talking about the school union, because teachers really worked overtime during the pandemic.
Some teachers did, but a lot of the teachers were at home. I mean, they may have had.
No, he's incorrect here. It depends on the state that you were living in. In Massachusetts, the teachers were still required to go to the classroom, even though the students were sent home and were learning remotely. They were still required to be in person to teach to an empty classroom. I know it sounds kind of weird, but that did happen. And so he doesn't know what he's talking about. It depends on the state that you were teaching in at that point in time. Remember, this decision was left up to the governors. So it depends on where you were living at that point in time. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. She has every right to be livid and upset. Think about how many teachers have student loan debt. And I just told you they don't make that much. Teachers in Massachusetts teaching in Boston public schools, they pay pretty well, but you need a master's degree to do that. So you're going to have more debt. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Teachers are one of the most underappreciated professions in this country. Constantly looked down upon. They have to pay for their own classroom supplies.
Good intention.
I know, but
our kids are not in a better.
I come from a long line of teachers.
I think the majority of
them so much out of their own paychecks. They don't get paid enough. They worked overtime during the pandemic.
I think most Americans agree with the loving teachers that go out there and do their job. But you can't look at where our kids are right now and give them a round of applause as a whole. Let's see what happens.
Here's the thing.
Let me just bring up this one thing when it comes to student loans. It's $20,000. $20,000 per borrower. It would affect about 40 million people. And what they're saying is, what do you mean college students weren't affected? They have not paid one dime of their student loan back since the pandemic started. You've had 2.5 years of freeze.
Actually, that's not true either. Some people have been paying on. It was optional. You could still pay on it if you wanted to. You see how this is the thing I don't like about mainstream media. This is also freaking bias. Like, when you listen to Fox News, you're going to hear these kind of talking points. You listen to CNN, you're going to hear the opposite talking points. Where's the news that just gives you the facts and just the facts? Hit that like button, guys. Where is it? I don't see that nowadays.
To rebuild your coffers, to get yourself forward in your education and your career that almost nobody else has when it comes to student loans, because they're relentless. Although I did, at one point, I got a deferment and I would pay more. I think it was 6 or 18 months. When I came back, my PIN was a lot higher. And I just don't think you break that covenant. And what these guys are saying at the Supreme Court, why don't you pass legislation? Why am I dealing with this? Guys, sit down, come up with a plan. If you feel those college is too expensive, that's not the issue. Yeah, college is too expensive. This is only going to make it worse, because now people are going to feel, wow, I can go afford a college. I don't have to worry about paying back my loan. Well, the class of 2028, do they have to pay back loans?
What's hard?
No, people are not going to say that. You're exaggerating. So the thing is here is that the root of the problem is that these universities have continued to increase tuition over the years to the point where it is absolutely ridiculous, even when you look at the state colleges. University of Massachusetts, in my opinion, is overpriced. It is a public school. So that's a big part of the problem. Also, the lenders. The student loan companies are connected to the banks, and both of them are connected to the college and the university. So as long as the student loan companies are going to continue to give these large amounts of student loans to these students that they know damn well these kids are not going to be able to pay off, most of these kids are not going to pay off all that debt. Let's just keep it real. The banks approve it. And since the banks approve it, the colleges approve it too. And the colleges continue to increase the tuition. You have students graduating with $70,000 of student loan debt from undergrad. I was an academic advisor, I know. From undergrad. And they're getting jobs, and this is even in Boston, they're getting jobs out of college where these employers are wanting to pay them maybe $50,000 a year. But you got $70,000 worth of student loan debt. And you have expensive rent you have to pay for. But don't forget, you got to have your roommates too to pay the rent. So my question is, if you're not already coming from a family that has some type of generational wealth that can put you through it, that can pay your rent, there are some out there where their parents do that can pay your rent, that can pay for your college where you don't have to take out any student loan debt. How are you supposed to save up enough money to put a down payment on a single family home, get married, and start a family? How are you supposed to do that when you are burdened with thousands and thousands of dollars of student loan debt? And don't get me started about the interest, because that's another piece that is often left out. There are people who have paid off their student loans already, technically, but they still owe the same amount because of the interest. Why do you have interest on student loans? I have so much to say about this issue, if you guys can't tell. I'm sorry, but I have so much to say because it really bothers me. It really does. Now, there's another clip that I want to show you as well. Let's go into this one from Case Study QB. Now, this is Ayanna Pressley. Now, Ayanna Pressley, again, she was a part of that original initiative to cancel student loan debt. So she had some things to say about the Supreme Court forgiving student loan debt. Listen to this.
Like millions of Black borrowers denied the ability to build generational wealth, I know the burden of student loan debt. I know what it is to land in default when your family is tripped up on economic hard times. And I want to talk about the shame that many borrowers carry. I'm beyond grateful to each of you who shared your story to make the case for national student debt cancellation. But let me be clear, the shame was never yours to carry. The only shame is that this nation has burdened families with this crushing debt, but we changed that.
Joining me now is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. And Congresswoman, thank you for being here. You know, this whole debate strikes me as very odd, that there's a question of whether this president has the legal authority to do bailouts. I'm old enough to remember the airline industry getting bailed out in 2001 for $15 billion, General Motors and Chrysler getting $17.4 billion in government bailouts. The coronavirus airline bailout was $25 billion.
Let's take a look at this. The airline industry, 2001, 2008, you had General Motors and Chrysler. 2020, the pandemic airline bailout. 2022 is the student loan forgiveness bailout. But when it comes to bailing out corporations, they never have a problem with that. They can bail them out in time. They bailed out Wall Street. This is really what we should be talking about. As she mentioned those businesses, we need to talk about them bailing out Wall Street in 2008. I don't see that on here. I see General Motors and Chrysler. Where's Wall Street, boo? Where's Wall Street? When Barack Obama let the American people lose their homes and bailed out Wall Street, you notice she didn't put that on this list. Let's go on.
It's not like the governments haven't done bailouts before. Does it surprise you that just this one is controversial?
Well, it's not surprising because of who the obstruction is coming from. These are Republican officials, corporate interests, calloused and disconnected from the hardship that everyday people are experiencing from every walk of life. These lawsuits are frivolous and they are partisan. The president clearly has the legal authority, and we just need the Supreme Court to uphold the law.
And I will note that these previous bailouts took place under Republicans, and so they did not ignite the kind of furor.
Yeah, but you're not going to mention the bailouts that took place under Barack Obama. You're not going to mention that, Joy? You're just going to skip over 2008 and skip over Wall Street and Goldman Sachs and all those punks? Really? You see how she tried to make it look? Don't get me wrong. Are the Republican politicians against this? Absolutely. Most of them are against it. But how are you going to pretend like the Democratic Party, when they have been in charge, they haven't done the same thing?
Also seem to recall that there are members of Congress, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Vern Buchanan, Mark Wayne Mullen, Kevin Hern, and Mike Kelly. But I note Greene and Gaetz, who received massive forgivable student loans from the government, PPP loans, while they were serving in Congress, and they don't seem to have a problem with being able to be bailed out have their businesses bailed out by the government they work for.
Well, moreover, Joy, some 40 million plus people stand to benefit from this relief. In the 4 weeks that the president's action was live or going into effect, some 26 million people applied. And in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, out of those eligible borrowers, 70% already applied. And so Republicans want to play with people's lives. Democrats are here to change and save people's lives. And we will do that by ensuring that those that are burdened by this debt feel the relief. We organized for that pause on student loan payments, and we heard from people how impactful that was. People were able to use those funds to keep a roof over their head, to pay for childcare and other essential costs. There are people paying monthly payments or the equivalency of a mortgage payment.
Thank you so much for saying that. Who stole my pants? Only applied, but not approved. What's she talking about? Oh dear, the chat is not happy with you right now, Ayanna Pressley.
This is an economic justice issue. It's a racial justice issue, given the disparate burden on Black and brown borrowers. 1 in 4 Black borrowers would have their debt zeroed out completely. This is a gender justice issue. Out of this $2 trillion debt, 2/3 of that debt is on the shoulders of women. And again, Joy, this is people from every walk of life. If society is to be judged by how we take care of our babies and our elders, well, we are failing. Because when I have a 76-year-old grandmother crying to me that she's afraid she's going to die still paying on this debt on a fixed income whose benefits have been garnished because she is still paying on loans at this point more than she took out. And when you have a whole generation whose path we are making harder than our own even was, because they're choked by this debt. They can't purchase a home, start a business, grow a family. When I have teachers who took on this debt because they wanted to be nation builders and educate our babies, and they can't afford childcare for their own babies and the monthly minimum, and some have even contemplated suicide. The point here, Joy, is that we can do something about it. The president clearly has the legal authority, and I need the Supreme Court to uphold the law. And we will keep organizing and applying pressure until this is done, just like we were negotiating with the White House until 7 o'clock in the morning until there was action taken.
So you're just going to leave out the fact that you instructed them to do this through the Higher Education Act of 1965? You're just going to leave that part. You're just going to leave that part out? Why don't you explain to people how we got here? Why don't you explain to people how it got to this point? Because Joe Biden didn't follow instructions. I'm sorry, but this needs to be said. I can't with these people. I can't with these politicians. I can't. They're so fake and they're all so cruddy. For you explicitly to not call that out, that is very, very important for people to understand.
Very quickly, given the status of the House right now, if this is overturned, is there any hope that anything could actually get through Congress to formalize this student loan debt relief?
Joy, I'm not ceding anything. As I can't stop, and this movement won't stop. Executive action is the most precise and effective way to bring about this relief to the 40 million plus borrowers who are eligible for it, who are crippled by this who are burdened by this every single day.
Two problems. I'm going to go ahead and answer what she didn't answer. Okay. One, is there a chance that it could pass in Congress? No. It's as simple as that. That was a yes or no question. No, it's not going to. It won't. That's why it was done the way it was done. That's why Joe Biden did it through his authority, because they already know it's not going to pass. Chances are it's not going to pass in the House because Republicans have control of the House. Even if it did squeak by and there was some bipartisan support and it did pass the House, that is not going to pass in the Senate. So then you run into the same problem. Let's remember, Kyrsten Sinema is now independent now, and she wasn't voting along with the Democrats before then for the most part anyway. So you could think she's going to approve something like this? No, she's not going to approve it. And if she's not going to approve it, chances are Joe Manchin's not going to approve it. So that's the answer to your question, Joy. It's not going to pass in Congress. Two, I think it's really interesting that she wants to mention that the people who met the qualifications, the people who fit the criteria are not going to get their loans forgiven if the Supreme Court doesn't approve this. Here's the problem. Why do people even have to fit a criteria to begin with? Why was it means tested? Somebody in a back room somewhere said, let's limit it to $125,000 a year, even if you live in a place like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, or New York City. Let's limit it to that amount. Somebody in a back room said, let's only do $10,000. How did they come up with that amount? Notice that's never really been explained. Let's give $20,000 for those who have Pell Grants. Who came up with the amount and why did they come up with those amounts? So there's your two problems. It is not going to pass in Congress. And two, it should have never been means tested in the first damn place. And we wouldn't be in this situation. A hot mess. We're going to move on to the next one because I want you to understand what's going to happen if this debt is not forgiven. This is not about an individual prediction. This is not predicting about what's going to happen with individuals. We're going to talk about what is going to happen with the economy. And everybody needs to be aware of this, whether you have student loan debt or not. Especially if you own a business. Now, this is coming from Common Dreams. Groups warn of financial disaster for millions if Supreme Court kills student debt relief. I'm not going to read the entire article, but we are going to jump to certain points here. I don't know why their font is always so small. Here we go. Denying student debt cancellation could cause financial disaster for millions of Americans. That's coming from Elizabeth Warren. It says, Ask Debt Collective, NAACP, and more than a dozen other organizations last month to explain how upholding or rejecting Biden's plan would affect borrowers. Reducing the debt burdens through cancellation will help avoid defaults when student loan payments resume and ensure borrowers do not face financial ruin as the economy continues its recovery from the pandemic. That is a reality that some people are going to go into default. What happens when you default on your student loans? Your credit is, to put it mildly, fucked. There's a lot of things you can come back from in life. That's not one of them. That one's a tough one. That one's a tough one. Let's go on. Let's go down here. I want to get to the part where they start to talk about the economics. You guys already know the history. They always write like really long articles. So the Debt Collective, they've been very much involved in this, FYI. Yada, yada, yada. I don't know why this is so long. Just get to the point. Okay, here we go. Over 98% of people who applied before the portal was shut down live in zip codes where the average per capita income is under $75,000. Nearly 2/3 of applicants reside in neighborhoods where the average person makes less than $40,000 a year. I know people graduating from undergrad and they're not offered jobs that are paying $40,000 a year. This is a reality. We do not have the same type of benefits that our parents had. Nobody ever gave me a pension. And I've been working since I was 16. You guys got a pension? Because I don't. Nobody ever gave me a company car. We don't have it. Some of these companies don't even give you dental insurance. What's that about? Guess your teeth don't matter. And not to mention that wages did not adjust for inflation. And here we are. The minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour in 2023. Somebody made a lot of money by exploiting a lot of young people, working class people, and the CEOs, they continue to double their wealth. But you are going to see failures. You are going to see problems with the economy. This is not just about buying a house and home ownership. This is about everything else. This is about people moving back in with their parents so they don't have to pay rent. Some of the things that my generation had to go through, my parents never had to deal with. My parents never had to move back in with their parents. Like that wasn't even like a thing. It was like you got married, you were gone. Bye. But I know people that have had to do that. Coming out of college, and those who came out of college, had a job, got laid off, had to go back to mom and dad. So that delays things, right? That delays opportunities that you could have. That delays you being able to start a family. That delays you being able to buy a house. Like all these things are put on hold. And not to mention, if you live where I live, houses are incredibly expensive here in Massachusetts. We got a break during the height of the pandemic because they really dropped the interest rates. The interest rates were down to like 3%, I think, at that point in time. So I was like, now is the moment. But even then, I had to get help from my parents. Because I sure as hell didn't have $50,000 down payment. It's a lot. It's a lot. So I just, something has to give. Something has to give. But this is going to affect the housing market, which it already has been, but it's going to affect it even more. These kids can't buy homes. Some of these kids are living as minimalists. You guys know what that's about? Some of these kids are living as minimalists. They're living with like 4 other roommates. They got a mattress on the floor. Like, nobody goes to college to struggle. People go to college so that they don't have to struggle. And so for those of you listening, this will be my advice to you, for all you peeps that are considering it. 2 things. Number 1, if you can do so, go to community college for the first 2 years and then transfer to a 4-year public university. Private schools are too freaking expensive. Public schools are expensive too, but not as expensive as the private schools for the most part. 2, because that'll cut down the amount of debt. And then 2, if you can go to school abroad, now don't sleep on this, because colleges in Germany, like these are good schools. These are not cheap. This is not like, I don't say cheap, but these are not like easy to get in schools necessarily. But if you can go to college in a country where the tuition is free, do that. You can tell them I sent you. Tell them I said, what's up? But that's my advice, because I worked in higher ed for over 10 years, and I'm here to let you know these colleges, unless they're forced to be accountable, they are not planning on decreasing tuition, and they damn sure are not planning on not increasing tuition. They will continue to increase it. These are not schools anymore. These are businesses. Hence why I don't work in higher ed anymore. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then we'll get to the last story. Thanks for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. However, Sabby, SCOTUS doesn't necessarily have the final say. Congress can overrule whatever SCOTUS does, but they won't. They won't overrule. They don't have the they don't have the people and the numbers. Simply by editing the law struck down or create a whole new law, these clowns throw it to the courts because we can't vote SCOTUS out like we can them. Justices tell Congress this all the time. Congress won't because they don't want to be held accountable, and SCOTUS is trying to clear their docket back and forth. And thank you for this tip as well. Sab, that guy saying, why does he have to have his taxes paid to relieve student loan debt? Send him straight to Grumbine Kaboob's class and tell him when it comes to the federal government, Congress legislates new money into existence to pay what we need, not taxes. We've all been duped by this Heritage Foundation talking point. Start telling Gen Z to study abroad for free because U.S. colleges to go under may cry uncle. Yes. Yep. Check out Germany. Okay. And Roger's referring to MMT, modern monetary theory. So Steve Grumbine has been on here a couple of times to talk about that. It just kills me when people make that talking points like, why do I have to pay for it? You're not paying for it. I get a little heated about that subject.